The air in the control room does not smell of danger. It smells of stale tobacco, dried coffee, and the sterile, metallic scent of heated electronics. It is the early morning of April 26, 1986. Outside, the world is asleep. The town of Pripyat, a model of Soviet progress, lies silent under a spring sky that is clear and indifferent. 50,000 people are dreaming in their beds, unaware that in a concrete hall just a few kilometers away, a handful of men are about to make a decision that will sever the timeline of history into two distinct eras, the world before this night and the world after. It happens in the space of a heartbeat, a sequence of choices, none malicious, all flawed, converging into a single point of catastrophe. We often think of disaster as a loud, chaotic event, a sudden crash of thunder. But here, the apocalypse arrives quietly. It arrives with the flick of a switch and the turning of a dial. It arrives because human beings, in their arrogance and their fear of authority, believe they can master the fundamental forces of the universe with a clipboard and a deadline. The tragedy of the Vladimir Ilyich Lenin nuclear power plant is not just a tragedy of technology, it is a tragedy of the human condition. It is the story of men who could not admit they were wrong until the air itself turned into poison. To understand how we arrived at this precipice, we must look not at the explosion, but at the silence that preceded it, the silence of obedience. Time flows differently in the control room of Reactor 4. It is a windowless sanctuary of dials, gauges, and illuminated buttons, a cathedral of the atomic age. The walls are lined with panels that monitor the heartbeat of beast capable of generating thousands of megawatts of power. At the center of this room are the operators. They are young, intelligent, and exhausted. Leonid Toptunov is only 25 years old. He has been on the job for mere months. He sits at the reactor control panel, his fingers hovering over switches that control the insertion of control rods, the brakes of the reactor. Beside him is Akimov, the shift supervisor, a man who believes in procedures, a man who trusts the manual more than his own intuition. And looming over them both is Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer. Dyatlov is a man of the old school. He is hard, unyielding, and terrifying to his subordinates. He does not ask for respect. He demands submission. He walks the floor with the heavy stride of a man who knows he is in charge, his voice cutting through the hum of the machinery like a whip. Tonight, there is a test, a safety test. It is a cruel irony that will haunt the annals of history forever. They are breaking the reactor to see if it can survive a breakdown. The test is simple in theory. They need to prove that if the power fails, the spinning turbines can generate enough residual electricity to keep the cooling pumps running for 45 seconds until the diesel generators kick in. 45 seconds. That is the gap they need to bridge. To do this, they must lower the power of the reactor. They must simulate a failure. But the test has been delayed. It was supposed to happen during the day, when the senior staff was present, when the grid was stable. But Kiev called. The grid needed power. Factories had to run. Quotas had to be met. So the reactor remained at half power for hours, poisoning itself. A buildup of xenon, a byproduct of the fission process, has begun to choke the core. Xenon absorbs neutrons. It stifles the reaction. It makes the reactor sluggish, unpredictable, and dangerous. The men in the room do not fully understand the extent of this poison. They only know that the reactor is difficult to control tonight. It is behaving like a tired beast that refuses to wake up. When Toptunov tries to lower the power further for the test, the reactor stalls. The power plummets, dropping far below the safe level. The needle on the gauge sinks toward zero. In any other industry, in any other country, this would be the moment to stop, to abort, to acknowledge that the conditions are no longer safe. But this is the Soviet Union in 1986. Failure is not an option. Aborted test means paperwork. It means explanations. It means a black mark on a career. It means Dyatlov will scream. And so fear takes the helm. Dyatlov orders the power to be raised. He bullies Toptunov. He questions his competence. The young man, sweating, hands trembling, pulls the control rods out. Not just some of them, almost all of them. He strips the reactor of its brakes to force it back to life. He is fighting the physics of the xenon poisoning, dragging the power up by sheer force of will and violation of protocol. In the core, the beast wakes up, but it wakes up angry. The water that cools the fuel rods begins to boil, steam bubbles form, and in this specific design of reactor, the RBMK, steam increases the reactivity. It is a vicious cycle, a positive void coefficient, a term that sounds dry and academic, but in reality describes a death spiral. More steam means more power. More power means more steam. The reactor is becoming a runaway train, and the operators have removed the brakes. At 1:23 in the morning, the test begins. The steam valves are closed. The turbines slow down. The pumps slow down. The water moves slower through the core. The temperature rises. The steam expands. The power begins to climb. Slowly at first, then exponentially. Toptunov sees the gauges. His eyes widen. The numbers are rising too fast. The computer, the Scala, screams a silent warning in data points that no one has time to read. The reactor is screaming. Akimov shouts, "Shut it down!" It is the order they should have given hours ago. Toptunov reaches for the button. The switch is labeled AZ5. It is the ultimate failsafe, the scram button. It is designed to drop all the control rods back into the core instantly, killing the reaction, stopping the fission, saving the day. It is the button you press when all else fails. Toptunov presses it. He expects the hum to die down. He expects the needles to drop. But the designers of the reactor had made a fatal mistake, a secret hidden in the blueprints known only to a few high-ranking scientists, not to the men operating the machine. The tips of the control rods are made of graphite. Graphite facilitates the reaction. It does not stop it. For the first few seconds as the rods enter the core, they do not reduce the power, they spike it. It is a detonator disguised as a brake. As Toptunov presses the button, the graphite tips enter the superheated, unstable core. They displace the water. The reaction does not stop. It surges. In a fraction of a second, the power creates a surge that defies imagination. The thermal power jumps from hundreds of megawatts to tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands. It happens faster than a human synapse can fire. The fuel pellets, uranium dioxide, shatter. They flash into vapor. The pressure becomes infinite. The heavy biological shield, a cover of steel and concrete weighing 1,200 tons, the upper lid of the reactor, is lifted into the air like a coin tossed by a giant. The connection lines sever. The coolant turns to steam instantly. And then the earth shakes. 1:23 and 45 seconds. A sound like the cracking of the world. Not one explosion, but two. The first tears the reactor apart. The second, a hydrogen explosion, obliterates the roof of the building. Blocks of graphite, glowing red-hot and deadly, are ejected into the night sky. They rain down on the surrounding asphalt, on the roof of the turbine hall, on the ground where men will soon walk. The core of the reactor is now open to the atmosphere, a burning crater of uranium and graphite, looking straight up at the stars. Inside the control room, the shockwave knocks the men off their feet. Dust falls from the ceiling. The lights flicker and die, replaced by the dim, sickly glow of emergency lighting. The air is instantly filled with dust, steam, and a strange metallic taste. It tastes like copper, like blood, like ozone. It is the taste of radiation ionizing the air inside their lungs. Silence returns, but it is a heavy, ringing silence. The hum of the turbine is gone. The screaming of the pumps is gone. There is only the hiss of steam and the sound of shouting voices. Denial is the first human response to the impossible. Akimov and Dyatlov pick themselves up. They look at the panels. The rods show they are stuck halfway. The gauges are reading nonsense. They believe the tank has exploded, perhaps a control tank, but not the reactor. It is impossible for the reactor to explode. Their training tells them the core is a fortress. They cannot conceive that the fortress is gone. They believe the core is intact. They believe they need to pump water into it to cool it down. This belief, this desperate hallucination, will dictate the next few hours of horror. Dyatlov orders the men to get water to the core. He sends interns, young boys, to run to the hall and manually turn valves. He is sending them to their deaths. These men run through corridors that are now awash with water and debris. They encounter obstacles that should not be there. They see light where there should be walls. They feel a heat that radiates from the walls themselves. One of them, Proskoryakov, peers through a smashed doorway and sees the impossible. He sees the glowing ruin of the core. He sees the fire that is not a fire, but a nuclear star burning on the surface of the earth. The radiation hitting his face is enough to kill a man 1,000 times over. But when he returns to report it, Dyatlov does not believe him. "You are mistaken," he says. "It is the emergency tank." Outside, on the roof, the graphite blocks burn with a strange iridescent flame. The bitumen roof of the turbine hall catches fire. The alarm sounds at the fire station in Pripyat. The firefighters are summoned. They are told there is a fire at the roof. Just a fire. No one mentions radiation. No one mentions the broken atom. Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik rallies his men. They jump into their trucks. They drive toward the glow. They are brave men, strong men, fathers and husbands. They joke as they put on their canvas jackets, jackets that offer no more protection against gamma rays than a sheet of paper. As they approach the plant, they see the colors. The smoke is not just black, it glows. The air above the reactor shimmers with a column of violet light, a beacon of ionization reaching into the heavens. It is beautiful in a terrifying way. It looks like a searchlight. They park their trucks and extend the ladders. They climb toward the roof. They step on the black debris scattered on the ground. "What is this?" one of them asks, kicking a block of graphite. "It's hot," another replies. They do not know they are kicking the debris of the reactor core itself. They pick it up. Their hands, covered only by leather gloves, begin to tingle. The skin begins to redden instantly. They are holding death in their hands. Back in the control room, the tragedy of obedience continues. Akimov and Toptanov, despite their shock, despite the chaos, stay at their posts. They believe they can save the reactor. They believe they can insert the rods manually if the hydraulics failed. They work with levers and valves, wading through radioactive water. Their skin begins to darken. They feel nauseous. They begin to vomit. The symptoms of acute radiation syndrome are setting in within minutes. This is the cruelty of the invisible enemy. It tears the DNA apart while you are still standing. It cooks the internal organs while the mind is still racing. They work feverishly, heroes in a battle that was lost before it began. They are trying to cool a reactor that no longer exists. They are pouring water into a crater, and that water flashes to radioactive steam, spreading the contamination further. Dyatlov, feeling the sickness himself, walks out of the room to report to the plant director, Bryukhanov. He walks through the debris. He sees the graphite. He ignores it. He reaches the bunker where the directors are gathering. The mood is one of confusion and defensive bureaucracy. They need to report to Moscow. They need to tell the Kremlin something. An accident, they say. A fire. The reactor is intact. Radiation levels are within normal limits. Why do they say this? Because their dosimeters, the devices used to measure radiation, are limited. The small handheld units max out at 3.6 Roentgens per hour. When the men turn them on, the needle slams to the maximum and stays there. 3.6. It is a high number, but not catastrophic. It is manageable. So they report 3.6. They assume the device is working. They do not understand that the actual radiation level is 15,000 Roentgens. The device is not reading 3.6 because that is the level. It is reading 3.6 because that is as high as it can count. It is like using a ruler to measure the depth of the ocean and reporting that the ocean is 12 inches deep because the ruler touched the bottom of its own scale. This number, 3.6, becomes the lie that travels up the chain of command. It travels to Kiev. It travels to Moscow. It gives the old men in the Politburo a false sense of security. It delays the evacuation. It condemns the firefighters on the roof to a lonely, agonizing death. It condemns the people of Pripyat to breathe the dust of the core for another 36 hours. On the roof, the firefighters are fighting a losing battle. The bitumen melts under their boots. The smoke is thick and choking. They feel weak. Their legs turn to lead. One by one, they collapse, not from the smoke, but from the invisible rays piercing their bodies. They are dragged away by their comrades, their faces swollen, their eyes red. They are taken to the hospital in Pripyat. The doctors there are not prepared. They have never seen radiation burns like this. The skin is not just burned, it is different. It is tanned, dark, as if the men had spent a week on a tropical beach. But underneath, the tissue is dying. The nurses strip the clothes off the firefighters. They throw the boots and jackets into the basement. Those clothes are so radioactive that they will remain deadly for thousands of years. The hospital fills with the smell of sickness. And yet, the city sleeps. The sun begins to rise over Pripyat. It is a Saturday morning. The sky is blue. The air is crisp. People wake up. They open their windows. They breathe in the fresh morning air, unaware that every breath contains isotopes of iodine and cesium. Children get ready for school. Mothers prepare breakfast. The amusement park, with its yellow Ferris wheel, is set to open in a few days for the May Day celebration. The Ferris wheel stands still, a skeleton against the sky, unaware that it will never carry a single laughing child. At the plant, the daylight reveals the horror that the night had obscured. Sitnikov, a physicist, is sent to the roof to look down into the reactor hall. He is a sacrifice. He knows it. He climbs the stairs. He steps onto the vantage point. He looks down. He does not see the reactor lid. He sees only a gaping hole, smoke, and the glow of the molten core. He takes a breath. He turns around. He descends to report the truth. The reactor is gone, he says. It is open. But even his eyewitness testimony is rejected. You are seeing things, they tell him. You are in shock. The denial is stronger than the physics. They refuse to believe because to believe is to admit the end of their world. To believe is to admit that Soviet engineering failed, that Soviet procedures failed, that they failed. So they continue to pump water. They continue to send men into the lethal zones. Helicopters are summoned. The military is mobilized. General Pikolov arrives in a truck fitted with lead shielding to measure the radiation himself. He drives into the plant perimeter. His dosimeter does not stop at 3.6. It climbs. It screams. It confirms the nightmare. The levels are lethal. The core is burning. The cloud is moving north, towards Belarus, towards the Baltic, towards Sweden. The secret is already escaping the borders of the Iron Curtain, carried by the wind. Inside the apartments of Pripyat, the dust settles on the windowsills. It is invisible, tasteless. The residents go about their Saturday. They see the smoke from the plant, but they are used to the plant. It is their neighbor, their provider, their pride. They do not know that the smoke is their executioner. Some gather on the railway bridge, the so-called Bridge of Death, to watch the pretty colors of the fire. They stand there, exposed, as the radioactive plume washes over them. The children play in the sandboxes. The sheer normalcy of the scene is the most terrifying aspect of the disaster. A genocide of silence is taking place. The authorities know. They know the radiation is rising. They know the reactor is destroyed, but they do not sound the alarm. They do not order the buses. They wait for orders from Moscow, and Moscow waits for confirmation. And while they wait, the isotopes settle in the thyroids of the children. They settle in the soil. They settle in the water. The delay is not measured in hours. It is measured in lives. The sun climbs higher. The day is warm.
It is a beautiful spring day, the kind of day that makes you glad to be alive. And all the while, the atom burns, indifferent to the lies, indifferent to the politics, indifferent to the fragility of human flesh. The invisible fire consumes the world, not with a roar, but with a whisper.
The flames. Lieutenant Pravik and his men climb the rubble, kicking aside blocks of graphite, unaware they are touching the very core of the reactor. They believe they are fighting a roof fire, but their skin begins to brown under the invisible bombardment. There is a metallic taste in their mouths, the taste of mortality. Inside the bunker, denial reigns supreme. Anatoly Dyatlov, despite the readings and the rubble, refuses to accept the impossible. He orders cooling water to be pumped into a crater that no longer exists, sealing the fate of those sent to turn the valves. The phone lines to Moscow carry assurances that the situation is under control, a lie that will cost thousands of lives. In the city of Pripyat, life begins its final morning. Children play in the ash settling on the streets, unaware that the air they breathe is poisoning their futures. It takes 36 hours for the buses to arrive, 36 hours of radiation seeping into the concrete, the trees, and the blood of 50,000 people. They leave their homes thinking they will return in 3 days. They will never return. Then come the liquidators, soldiers, miners, and volunteers thrown into the breach to shovel radioactive debris with little more than lead aprons and shovels. They are the human cost of containment, sacrificing their health to build the sarcophagus, a tomb of concrete and steel designed to bury the mistake for centuries. Chernobyl was not merely a technological failure. It was the collapse of a system built on secrets. It exposed the terrifying fragility of human control over the atom. The radiation respects no borders, no ideology, and no apologies. It remains in the soil, a silent monument to the moment man tried to master nature and failed. The most dangerous element was never the uranium, it was the lies.